All right, welcome to the Life with Joey Calvo podcast. I am Joey Calvo. Before we get to our amazing guest today, please continue to help those out in California with the wildfires. A lot of people lost a lot of things, so every donation helps in every which way possible. Also, it's going to sound like I'm groveling, but we are raising money here to upgrade and expand this podcast to the point where we could do live events like meet and greets, as well as improving the podcast studio per se. So definitely the campaign is on the screen as well as in the description. So today we kind of have a sports celebrity. we kind of have a sports celebrity today because this person has started out. Well, not only was she a sportscaster with local stations, excuse me, like in Rochester, New York, and Columbus, Georgia. But she was one of those ESPN columnists. That's what I meant to say. Sorry, I almost said something back in the 50s and 60s, but wrong terminology. So that's not. She was a columnist, reporter. She's also a writer, educator, mom, and living the best life possible. Anne Montgomery, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Joey. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So before I'm going to have you explain how you got to where you're at right now, and then the fun begins.
I think you mean how right now I'm in the middle of the Caribbean in St. Croix and the Virgin Islands. So that's a long way to get to.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying, but how did you get, how did Anne Montgomery become what I just mentioned?
Sportscaster, I think is what you mean.
Yes.
Bottom line is I wanted to be a sportscaster back when women just didn't do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was the early 1970s when my mother marched up to me in her spike heels and said, "So what do you want to be when you grow up? We got to pick a college." And I said, "I want to be a sportscaster." Mm-hmm. It's actually under my picture in my high school yearbook.
Wow.
And I am 70, just turned 70. And so that's how long ago that was. And it just, my mother looked at me and said, "I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you. Don't be ridiculous." And she was right. She was right. Now, why did I want to be a sportscaster? I was an ice skater growing up because I was before Title IX, and we didn't have, there were opportunities for girls, but mostly there weren't. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up in an ice rink. I was not a good ice skater. I was way too big to be an ice dancer, but like every kid who practices a sport, works at a sport, we all think we're going to get gold medals or we're all going to be pros, right?
Yeah.
Or scholarships, whatever. That never happened, but I did find that idea that being an athlete was something admirable. Mm-hmm. And when I was in high school, I worked with the ice hockey team. Okay. And one day, one of the hockey players handed me an announcement because I was on the broadcast crew. It was like a radio station. Yeah. And we did radio, we did a show every morning with music and announcements. And so because he handed me this hockey announcement, I went to the basket and pulled out all the sports announcements that day. Mm-hmm. And the guys looked at me and they said, "You can't do that. You can't read those announcements. You're a girl." And we're 5 minutes from going on the air. And the teacher went, "Annie can read the sports if she wants to. We have a show to do. Quit fighting. Get on the air." So we did. And I read the sports. And the guys were angry about that. And then, so the next day I did the same thing. I pulled all the sports announcents. So they started playing theme song for me. They started playing Mission Impossible before I and then they started calling me Big Ann with the sports. They thought I'd be offended, but I really liked it.
Yeah.
And after a while, all the coaches and the athletes, everybody would hand me sports announcements over the course of the day. So I became a sportscaster in high school. What I didn't understand is the real world was not accepting of that.
Right.
When I went to college, I went to Miami of Ohio, and all of my professors said, you will never be a sportscaster, you're a woman. And finally, my senior year, they decided to do a sports show on the local PBS station. And strangely, they said, would you like to co-host it? I said, that'd be great. And I went on only to discover that the football coach, the baseball coach, and the basketball coach all refused to speak to me. They said, we're not talking to you, you're a woman. So what do I do? I'm co-hosting the show and these coaches won't speak to me. But I had a revelation that, you know, there was a hockey team, an archery team, a gymnastics team, a swimming team, a lacrosse team, archery, all these teams that no one paid attention to. So I went marching up to them and said, I'd like to interview you. And they were thrilled because no one ever paid attention to them. So that's how I got some, you know, sports reporting knowledge. But when I got out of college, I couldn't get an interview anywhere. And I started working in a restaurant in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. in the 80s, 70s and 80s. And boy, was that fun. I think I wanted a job there for a while. In fact, my parents were horrified. They came down and they said, we put you through college so you could be a waitress. I'm like, no, Mom, I have a plan. I'm going to be a sportscaster. So what happened was I went to a Washington Capitals game. And one of the men that was in our group was an amateur ice hockey official. He did kids hockey and high school and that thing. And he was bemoaning the fact that there weren't enough officials. And my aunt was with me. She goes, oh, Annie skates. She grew up skating. Why don't you be a referee? And I went, all right. So I signed up to be an amateur ice hockey official. And I had to take a test and I had to, you know, go through some classes. And I will never forget. Now, do you know the difference between hockey skates and ice skates?
Okay. And I'm going to stop you for a second before you continue on. I owe you an apology because the Wi-Fi that we use is T-Mobile. And T-Mobile is very good with live streams on how it sucks. So it froze. So that's why I lost you for a minute. So my apology about that.
No worries.
So please continue.
Lose it all the time out here that's why I've got you in a hotspot because our internet out here in the Caribbean is insane. So don't worry about it.
Okay. So
where do you want me to go from? Well, anyway, I became a hockey official and for little kids. And I had an epiphany on the way home from that game that I didn't know enough about sports to be a broadcaster. I didn't play football. I didn't play baseball. I didn't play hockey. I didn't understand the games well enough. So I decided to take 5 years and to become a sports official, an amateur official in football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, and basketball. And then I would learn the games that way. And I believe some forward-thinking news director somewhere would go, hey, she knows all about sports. She's a referee and an umpire. And that they would hire me. And that is exactly what happened. But I was 28 by the time I got my first job in Columbus, Georgia. I went to Rochester, New York. I went to Phoenix, Arizona. And then, as you mentioned, I went to ESPN where I anchored SportsCenter. And then my contract was not renewed. I was almost pushing 40. I was in my late 30s. And I wasn't pretty enough to be on camera anymore. And that was the reality. It's still some of the reality. And I went back to Phoenix feeling very sorry for myself. I did a couple of years as the Phoenix Sun studio host. So I did a half show before the games. I did a 15-minute halftime, and then I did a call-in show at the end. It was great fun. It was the Charles Barkley's years. And then I was almost 40, and I couldn't get a job anywhere. It was horrible. Yeah, so I felt really sorry for me for a long time. Yeah. Then I got over it.
And then after that, you started to go into education and
it took a while. It took a while because when I got back to Phoenix, my old boss at Channel 10 there said, I'm going to have a job for you. Give me 4 months. I said, give me a couple months. I said, great. So I was just having a good time thinking I'm going to be back on TV. And one day I opened the newspaper and he had been fired.
Oh, wow.
And now there's no job. And today, there are thousands of sports jobs. But in my time, most cities had NBC, ABC, CBS. Each one of those had 3 sportscasters. They're like fewer than 10 of us in every town. So it was very hard to get a job. So I found I couldn't get a job anywhere. I was in the middle of, I was getting a divorce. I was in debt. A friend took me in because I had 2 big dogs and 4 cats and nowhere to go.
Oh,
And
wow.
I even went to a sports bar one day, and I saw they needed a bartender, and I went, oh, okay, I need some money. I got to do this. I walked in. I said, sir, if you hire me, to the manager, I said, I can entertain your sports patrons even if they're sober. I can do that, and I can make a great cocktail. So hire me. And he looked me up and down like I was a piece of meat.
Yep.
And said, I don't think so. And I realized he wanted some 20-something in a short
Uh-huh.
skirt.
Yep.
And it wasn't me. So what did I do? I went back to officiating. I went from ESPN to officiating Pop Warner and Little League and high school and men's leagues. And I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't want anybody. I mean, I hid behind my face mask in baseball and my uniform in football. And why did I hide? Oh, I was in the grocery store one day after a baseball game in my blue umpire shirt and my gray pants. I'm all sweaty, right? And I'm picking out some groceries. And some guy comes up to me and goes, hey, didn't you used to be somebody? And I went, that's why I hid. I'm like, what am I supposed to say? I went from anchoring Sports Center to calling Little League. So yeah, it took me a while to go back to school and be a teacher. It took about 4 years.
Okay. And then, sorry about that. There we go. It'll end that noise. Yeah, that was the Jetsons, just to let you folks know. That was my cell phone going off. All right, so so you were up there at ESPN. So you got the opportunity to work with people like Chris Berman and the late Stuart Scott.
No, he wasn't there yet. He was not there yet.
Oh, he wasn't there yet?
Dan Patrick, Tommy Mees.
So then ESPN were jerks and letting you go. And I will state that because ESPN is now that ABC and Disney owns ESPN now. So of course, everything's going downhill.
ABC owned it when I was there, so it's always been owned by someone else.
Yeah. But But I'm saying in reference to now, and then going into going back and being an official and a umpire, referee, etc. Back in Arizona, and then what got you into writing from being in sports, being up there to where you had like Charles Barkley almost at the tip of your on your fingertips in a way, to going down and getting being knocked down, which I feel like that happened, and going down to being an umpire, to Little League and so on, to going into teaching. But how did it lead you into being a novelist?
Okay. People don't understand that the most valuable skill to being a sports reporter, sportscaster, is writing. You have to be able to write a story. Now, if you're calling a game, you're doing color or play-by-play, that's off the cuff. That's different. But when you're doing Sports Center or the evening news, there are scripts. And you follow the scripts because you've got a director and a producer and camera people, and they have to know what you're doing. So you write scripts. So I had to learn very quickly how to tell stories. And sometimes those stories were 15 seconds. Sometimes they were 30. Sometimes they were a minute. We tell stories. Okay. And so when I was no longer in television, one day I saw an ad for a sports reporter in the back of the newspaper. And I called and I went over there and I said, hire me. And the newspaper editor looked at me. He goes, you don't know anything about writing sports stories. I said, I just spent 10 years writing sports stories. I was on live TV 2,000 times and I wrote those scripts. I wrote those stories. Give me a chance. It was a $7 an hour job.
Wow.
And I begged. And I got the job. And my stories started ending up on the front page.
There you go.
And I had more space to tell the stories now. TV is very short space to tell a story. So I started writing for newspapers and magazines. And that gave me more space to tell stories. And the jump to novels was not that strange. It's just a longer story. What is strange is I do not write anything about sports. I have 6 published novels, traditionally published, meaning the publisher paid for it. And none of them are about sports.
Okay, yeah, I see. I see the novels that you have are The Castle, A Light in the Desert, Wild Horses on the Salt, The Scent of Rain, and Wolfcatcher.
And Your Forgotten Sons came out most recently.
It's
that's her.
Yeah,
it's her.
Yeah, but yes, folks, I am cheating a little bit. Normally, like everything, I just go by on the fly. Like I said, everything's just a conversation form in reference to this, but it did not mention it on here. So I'm going to go back to ESPN. I'm going to go back to the television part because one thing I'd like to share with you is, and I actually do have a sports story for you on top of all this. So when I was younger, about almost 30 years ago, not even 30. About 20 plus years ago, I was interested in actually going to like the Connecticut School of Broadcasting and thinking of being the next Howard Stern back then. And of course, I went to the open house, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you can get in. Yeah, we'll accept you." Well, what I didn't realize is it was $8,000, and they don't do financial aid. So I was really upset. And so, I've been kind of working on it a little bit. And 20 years later, almost to the time, I went back to the same place. And, same thing. I would have been in, but it went to $15,000. I was like, ooh. But they said, if you come up with $2,500, we'll help finance it. I wish I had it because then, I would have been able to edit these better and, really be more. But in reference with you being, in sportscasting and on TV, and especially ESPN, what were the highs and lows of really being in television? Like I threw out Chris Berman and the late Stuart Scott, which, you said he wasn't there yet at the time. I could throw Scott Van Pelt on. See, yes, folks, I used to watch ESPN once in a while. Okay. And I'm only 13 years younger than she is. In reference to that. But, I was used to watching Chris Berman, Bob Lay.
Oh yeah, I worked with Bob.
You worked with Bob, yeah, and then later on, the late Stuart Scott and the late Jimmy Valvano when he was, doing college basketball play-by-play, color commentator, and then of course Dick Vitale. But before I get to your highs and lows, here's the highest point of my life that would even surprise anyone. And I actually just brought it up recently. I'm dating myself back to 1990, 1991. We'll say between 90 and 92. My first girlfriend was in high school, and she got on the bowling team. So she wanted me to be her coach, quote unquote. So I would come out to Carolina. Yes. You remember Carolina Lanes in North Brunswick, New Jersey?
I do not.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, here comes the reason why I'm saying all this. Carolina Lanes in North Brunswick. I was actually a bowler for Franklin High School in Somerset, New Jersey, class of 1989. She was with a Catholic school in New Brunswick. So, make a long story short, I go out there to help support her, and I meet two of the greatest bowlers of all time, Mark Roth and Johnny Petraglia. Johnny Petraglia was not much of a big chatter, but Mark Roth and I were standing there. We're watching all these high school bowlers, and we were literally like just talking like, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And I was like, wow. Like, I would never think that that I'm standing next to a professional bowler, a legend, and God rest his soul. But it was like really into it. I mean, it was really amazing to chat with, because that's where they had the PBA championships back in the 90s as well, until it went to other places. So that was, I wanted to throw that into you, so that way you had an understanding of that there was sports in my life too. And, like I said, meeting Johnny Petraglia and Mark Roth was like heaven in itself, because like I said, you would never think you would ever meet anybody. And, of course, Mark Roth was grew up in Jersey. So that was the best thing. So now we're going to ask you for your highlights. The best parts. Yeah.
It might not be what you think.
Okay.
When you work around sports, you see these people all the time, and it's just your job.
Yeah.
So it gets to a point where you're not a fan anymore like that.
Right.
So, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, all of these people, it just became work. Not in a bad way, but you have to understand that because I was the only woman almost always in the press box, in the locker room. There were not even women photographers or producers.
Right.
So it was a constant fight for me. And sometimes it was awkward. And you say, what's a highlight? When I was working in Phoenix, Arizona, of course, the Phoenix Suns were the hottest thing going.
Yeah.
And so my job for the evening might be go cover the Lakers and the Suns, right?
Right.
This one night, we're all in a scrum. All of the press people are in a scrum waiting to go into the Lakers locker room. And I'm there, and I'm the only woman, and it's always awkward because, quite honestly, nobody belongs in an athlete's locker room but the athletes. That's my opinion. Right. And the other guys always fought with me about that. The problem is the players will sneak out. And so if you've got to interview somebody and they bail, now you have a problem. So I knew we had to go in. And it never occurred to me that the men felt awkward too. The other reporters felt awkward. So we hear this blaring music after the game. I think the Lakers won that night. Yeah. And the door pops up and here's Magic Johnson. Oh. And he comes out and that big grin of his. Yeah. And he came out and he saw me in the front of the pack of reporters. And he grabbed me and started dancing with me.
Oh, wow.
And at first I was horrified. But then all the guys started laughing in a good way.
Yeah.
Meaning it broke the tension for all of us.
Yeah.
And Magic gave me a big wink and walked away. And it's like he made me acceptable.
Yes.
And honestly, Charles Barkley was the same way. Charles never made me feel like I didn't belong.
Right.
And as he was a reporter's dream because he never spoke in cliches. He told you the truth. You didn't have to always like what he said.
And he still does today.
And he was a nice man.
Yeah.
And then there were certain situations where guys were crappy to me. And I'll give you an example. All of us reporters traveled on the plane with the teams and that kind of thing. I was the beat reporter for the Arizona Cardinals for 2 years, so I traveled on their flights and everything.
Football. Not football.
Football.
Yeah. When you said Arizona Cardinals, I started thinking about baseball all of a sudden.
No.
Then I realized it was St. Louis in reference to that.
No. They came there. The year I started in Phoenix was the year they moved to Phoenix. So anyway, I'm used to being around the same reporters all the time. We all are covering the same stories. And so we were covering the NBA playoffs. The Suns were playing Golden State. And we all go out and have drinks after the games, right? And I asked one of the other reporters, what time is tomorrow's press conference? And he said 10 o'clock. I said, thank you very much. And the next day, my cameraman and I got there at 9:30 in the morning, and everybody's gone except that guy. He's sitting on the practice court on a chair with his hands behind his head and his legs spread out. And he goes, oh, are we a little late this morning? So I had to stop my cameraman from beating the shit out of him. and with that, the PR lady came out. There was a woman who was the media coordinator for the Golden State. And I said, look, I need to do a feature on Manute Bol for the 5 o'clock news. And she said, I'm sorry, his day is over, practice is over, and this is their personal time, and I'm screwed because now there's going to be a hole in the news. And she said, but I'll go in and ask him and tell him that you're here. And I waited, and I'm sweating, going, I got a minute and a half to fill in the news and no story. And here comes Manute Bol, all 7'7" of him.
Oh wow!
He's got a white towel around his neck, and he was so charming. And he did not have to do that. He did not have to come out and interview him. And I'll never forget interviewing him. I'm like on my tiptoes, holding my microphone. But he was such a gentleman and took time out of his day that he didn't have to take. So in my world, that was one of the highlights of my existence in TV, that he went out of his way. You got one guy being a jerk and one guy being an incredibly nice man. But then there were things that just happened because I was ignorant of what I was doing. I was in Columbus, Georgia, and my news director goes, go down to the Veterans Coliseum. The wrestlers are here. I went, the wrestlers? I mean, the Olympic wrestlers? He said, no, the wrestlers. And so my partner grabs me and he goes, no, it's WWF at that point. And I'm like, that's not a sport. I said, that's sport. I know. So they dragged me down there and we're set up in this empty hallway. I can still see the big gray long gray hallway. And here comes this giant with this scraggly hair, and he's all kind of wet, like he just got out of the shower. And he's dragging himself down. He comes up, he stands in front of me, doesn't say anything, and I'm looking at him, and I can't think of a single thing to ask him. Talk to me about football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, figure skating, skiing. I can do those. Tennis, but I couldn't think of anything to ask. So I put the microphone in his face and I said, I have to be honest here. I don't know anything about wrestling. I know it's fake. So what should I ask you? And he looked at me and he tore his shirt over, and he's got all these crisscross scars all over his shoulders. He goes, do those look real? Does that look real to you, honey? And I went, and I'm speechless because he's like a monster. And then he pulls up his pant leg and there's these scars all over his knee. And he goes, that's real, isn't it? Is that real? And so I made a bad mistake. I understand it's choreographed. We know the outcome before it begins, which is why it wasn't a sport to me. But that doesn't mean they're not athletes. So that was a bad moment. And I'm looking back, I'm sure he was roided out of his mind because it was the 80s. And I can't even remember who he was.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. The only person I can think of that's a giant back then, that had to be about 7 foot tall. Did you ever see the movie The Princess Bride?
Are you talking
Andre the Giant?
No, it wasn't Andre.
It wasn't Andre. Okay.
No, and it wasn't Big John Studd.
Okay.
Because I got to know him later. We became friendly. Nicest man in the world. His real name is John he's deceased. Was John Minton III. And he was into history, and we would sit and have a drink and talk about history. Nicest man in the world. But I wish I had met him first so I understood about wrestling. I didn't want to cover it like it was a real sport, but my job was to tell a story that night, and I was not prepared. So that was not a great moment. The other times that were very hard for me were when people assumed I didn't know what I was talking about because I'm a woman. I'll give you a perfect example. And when you do Sports Center, you have to write half the stories, right? And normally a production assistant will come over and show you 4 highlights from whatever game you've got to cover, like 8 games or whatever. And they'll show you the highlights, and then you can write them in your own words. And then you've got them ready for the show. But sometimes the games end while you're on the air. while you're live on. So a production assistant will come running in the studio and hurl some highlights at you, and then the light goes on. And that's what happened to me this day. And so the camera light goes on, and I said, oh, let's go to Wrigley Field, where, oh no, a fan got hit with a foul tip in the front row, and the medics are eyes bleeding out. And I knew that was an error.
Wow.
That was a mistake.
Wow.
But I couldn't fix it because I had to go on to the next set of highlights. So at the end of every sports center, there's something called a post-mortem. And that means everybody involved with the show sits around a big conference table, and we all talk about what went well, what went poorly, and what can we do better. So everybody made their comments. I raised my hand. I said, look, Rich, this was the production assistant, 21 years old, just out of college, desperately wants to be in the sports world. But I said, look, Rich, that first highlight, it was wrong. He goes, what are you talking about? The foul tip into the front row? I said, yeah, that's impossible. I said, a foul tip is a ball that goes from the bat to the catcher's glove. It's a strike. It's a live ball. So if you've got a guy stealing home, then you got to let him do that. If it's a foul ball, it goes out of play. It's dead. Right. So you can't, I got to send you back to third base. And there's silence, 12 guys. No one defended me. And this guy stands up and he goes, you're nothing but a picky bitch. Whoa. And I said, no, Rich, I'm an umpire. And I said, and some people know I'm an umpire and that I shouldn't make that kind of mistake.
Right.
He stomps off. The next day I got called into my boss's office, who ordered me to apologize because I hurt this 21-year-old's feelings.
Sounds like Rich Eisen.
Well, but I'm just saying, wouldn't you think they would want to be right?
Yeah, yeah.
But they didn't believe me that I was right. I said, look, I ended up being an umpire for 25 years. I ended up being a referee, a football referee for 40.
Right.
Okay. I know what I'm talking about. And I'd been an official. I never quit officiating. Okay. I was an official all through these years. Every year I had to take national exams and go through classes and do scrimmages. And in Arizona, football never ended. Baseball never ended. It was year round. So why did you hire me if you don't think I know what I'm doing?
All right. Well, before we continue on, I have to make an apology. If Rich Eisen ever sees this podcast, I apologize. I didn't mean to offend you. But when she said Rich, that was the first name that came into my mind.
No. This was a production. It was a kid.
Okay. I'm just saying. But if he heard, because I kind of put Rich Eisen down a little bit.
No, it wasn't.
So if he ever hears it, I'm apologizing for it. So being, like you had your struggle with ESPN, like I said, like we mentioned, and being called into the boss's office because this putz, I would say,
me too.
Young putz, just was like thinking they thought they knew everything, but they were actually wrong, but didn't want to admit it. But just
didn't want a woman to tell him he was wrong.
The women then like you said, in reference to Title IX, to where women have now more availability in sports than ever before, and or even being put down by a woman for anything,
I didn't put anybody down. I was just making a point.
Right. No, I know, but I'm
correct.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying about putting them down in reference to, putting them, I mean, I know of some people that still do that to this day with me, in reference to, getting that point in to me. So the best thing that you mentioned in reference to being a sportscaster was Manute Bol, the late Manute Bol, and Barkley and Magic Johnson and I mean Charles, ever since he got into the broadcasting role, is totally different than you would ever think he was as a basketball player.
No, he seems to be the same guy he was.
He's still saying, but his mouth got better, we'll say, in reference to. But again, he was here in Philly, but that was before. Well, I was in Jersey, so I was a Jersey Nets fan. So I was more into the, Michael Ray Richardson and you know those players, and especially going to the Meadowlands Arena to watch them play, and then in reference to like going to Rutgers Stadium. Well, Rutgers Stadium has changed so many damn times. I've lost track of what the name of it is now, but going to Rutgers Stadium when it was rebuilt back in the 90s, and I was actually working at a newspaper, Home News in New Jersey, and my boss turned around and said, "Listen, you got here's 2 tickets to Rutgers Stadium, see Rutgers Kent State." So I took a friend of mine, and it was actually interesting. I never really watched college football. I mean, I watched high school football, being being a class officer, quote unquote, for the class of '89, and I went to a couple football games, especially the Thanksgiving ones. Well, not every one of them though, but some. But also, you know, getting the opportunity to go to a college football game, or going to even see the Mets play, and that was another thing. This late friend of mine did. We actually came out here to Philly. We were living, of course, growing up in Jersey. We came out here to Philly, and I didn't think that I would ever have been in the Spectrum before they tore it down. And now living in Philly, I've been in Citizens Bank Park to watch the Phillies play the Mets. Because I am a diehard Mets fan. Even though the Nets are in Brooklyn now, I'm still a Nets fan. I am a Devils fan. But and in reference to football, growing up in New Jersey, of course, you had to be either a Jets or Giants fan. Nope. I was a San Francisco 49er fan because of Joe Montana.
Of course.
Yes. But in reference to the Giants, and I'm dating myself back to 88, 89. This is when Phil Simms was the quarterback of the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was actually doing like a meet and greet. He was signing autographs in the supermarket I worked in. But unfortunately, I was nowhere near where they had him. They had him all the way out in the back of the store. And so if I had the opportunity, I couldn't see him. But I had to throw the Phil Simms in there. But in reference to, like I said, the best highlight in my life was, like I said, like I mentioned earlier about meeting Mark Roth, and Johnny Petraglia. I mean, that was like the greatest thing in my life because, I wasn't much of a bowler, but, I did a lot of bowling back then. Like I said, I was in the high school and stuff. And then, like I said, the first girlfriend I had, was into bowling, got on the bowling team because it just surprised the heck out of me, in reference to it. So the best, you said the best people that you chatted with, of course, Magic Johnson, Charles Barkley, the late Manute Bol. Of all the interviews that you ever did, okay, I don't know if you actually did say the worst one. Who was I know you mentioned about the wrestler, but that,
You mean a bad interview? Oh, that.
Yeah.
Mr. Bidwell, who owned the Cardinals, the Arizona Cardinals.
Okay.
The Cardinals team is different than all the other NFL teams because it's owned by a family that is not worth billions of dollars. Well, they are now with the teams worth what they are, but it was the family business. They didn't buy a team as a toy for the owner. They were and still are the owners of that team.
Okay.
And the old man, Bill, when he came to Arizona, I had to do it wasn't a live on the air interview, but it was a live to tape, meaning there were 2 cameras.
Right.
There wasn't going to be editing. And it was a 20-minute interview.
Right.
And he wouldn't talk to me.
Oh.
It was like he would only say yes and no. He was very uncomfortable in public. He was a very nice man, apparently, did a lot of nice things for people. But he was just not, he had a red bow tie, I remember. And he was just not comfortable in front of a camera. And I don't know what happened, but it wasn't my best day because no matter what I asked him, he would answer in like 2 words. And as a reporter, you never ask closed questions, which are yes or no, or where did you go to school? Because they can just say Ohio State, and then you've got no comments.
That's to work with,
It was horrible. It was horrible. There was another one. This was ridiculous. An Olympic equestrian. He was like a show jumper in the Olympics on horseback. And he was such a jerk to me. Some guys didn't like that I came out to, they were like, they felt insulted that they didn't send a real reporter.
Oh, wow.
And kind of like when I walked on the football fields on Friday night and then I'm the referee and they're like, oh, couldn't they send a real referee? It was kind of like that.
Yeah.
But this guy, I can't remember his name, but I was just trying to, be comfortable with him and making banter before my cameraman, or was turning off the camera, whatever.
Right.
Turning it on. And I said, oh, I like to ride. And, because I could ride a horse through the woods and that kind of thing. He goes, really? And he threw the reins of this beautiful horse at me. Oh. He goes, go ahead. Jump the course. Oh, and I can see a dare.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm an idiot. So I got on that horse. It was a big horse. Not knowing it was an English saddle. I don't know if you know the difference, but a Western saddle.
I don't. I'm not much into equestrian sports, so.
Well, but Western saddles are what Americans use. It's a cowboy saddle. So you could put the rope around the horn and rope a cow, right? But bad riders, you cannot grasp it if you're going to fall off, right? I could ride, but I'd never been on this English saddle that had nothing to hold on to.
Oh, wow.
And so he just stood there with his arms across his chest. He said, go ahead. You're a rider. I'm like, yeah. So I galloped that horse up to that first fence and freaked out, pulled the horse back. And I went, I'm not going to let him do this to me. I rode back and I went with the horse and I jumped that first fence. I jumped a second fence. Then there was a fence that went down into a water feature, like up and down. And I don't know what else. And then at the end, there's this flat out gallop to the end. I had my hands in that horse's mane on a death grip.
Wow.
And when I got to the end, my cameraman is like, what are you doing? And the guy's standing there looking at me. And I was shaking so badly, I couldn't get off the horse. My knees were shaking. It was terrifying. But, I'm kind of stupid sometimes. And I couldn't let him put me down to like, you're a woman, you won't do it. Right. When I got back to the station, my news director was like, what were you thinking? But he put it on the air. Yeah.
And really, in honesty, if that was like what was happening today, I mean, that would be like really worthwhile because, you were dared. And you went out there. I mean, we have there's a sports reporter, a weekend sports anchor here in Philadelphia at Channel 3. His name is Pat Gallen. And he has done, some of these, like he gets involved with the, some of these sports that are going on. And he also does a podcast of his own as well. Well, that's shown on you can watch it on Amazon Prime, folks. It's called A Gallon of Questions, and his last name is spelled Gallen. He's really, really interesting. But he does, do like what you did that time. So, and as we're talking about this, I've been thinking, there's a gentleman that I kind of know. Well, he's on my Facebook, but I have been, believe it or not, and I'm admitting this now, I started to put a little pressure of having this podcast put on. He has a network. He's also he was also a how can I say, kind of like PR, but he was like an agent type for news reporters and anchors and so on. Well, he just started a television network that you can get on Roku, Amazon Fire, etc., called DBTV. And as we're talking, I'm thinking like I should like go to him. I've got to him already for this podcast. Have you thought about doing your own show and literally just like what I'm doing? And I've done this for 6 years, and I've always said, if I've made a difference in somebody's life, I'd like to know proof-wise. So have you thought about doing something like this, even like doing like what you did back then, revisiting that now in 2025 and really culminating everything that you've done back then and bringing it back?
I'm an author, and part of my responsibility as an author is to sell books. And so because of that, I have a website and I blog every week, and that's to sell books. Should I be a podcaster? Yes, I should, but I'm lazy. So I like being guests on other people's podcasts. It's easier.
I think you could do it. I really think you could do it.
Here's the thing. I don't miss TV.
Okay.
I really don't. I ended up being a teacher for 20 years. I don't miss teaching. I miss Friday night football.
Okay.
That I miss being an official. And since you're a football fan, I have a question for you. How many referees on a football field?
Oh boy. I'm going to guess. I'm going to say 8.
Okay, now I'm going to give you a hint. It's the same at Pop Warner as it is in the NFL.
Wow. And I never watched Pop Warner.
Same in high school. It's the same in high school and college, and in men's leagues.
Okay. Oh boy. I remember.
You can win a lot of beer on this one.
Okay. I still think about 8.
No, there's 1.
1.
The referee is the one in the white hat.
Right.
The referee is the one that says I have holding 76 offense. That's part of the foul. Okay. So for my first 14 years as a football official, I was a wing. I was like a line judge.
Yeah, that's what I was counting. I was counting the line judges and all that.
Right. Yeah, everybody does. There's umpires, there's back judge, there's side judge, all of that.
Yeah.
So after guys kept throwing me off their crews every year, saying we're never going to get the state championship with you because you're a woman. Same shit as I dealt with in TV.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I stood up in a meeting of 400 football officials, and they said, anybody want to be a referee and make a new crew? And I stood up because I figured they'll see me. They know they're never going to get the state championship with me as the referee. But I decided to put the white hat on and be the crew chief.
Yep.
And I ended up doing that for the last 24 years of my football career. And I retired in 2019. Okay. I miss it all the time. That is what I miss. Friday night football. And I think maybe being an official helped me navigate being a sportscaster because I wasn't welcome in either world.
Right.
Or when I was a baseball umpire too, I was a freak. And so the bottom line is, if I could go out in a football field and have coaches and fans and people screaming at me and need a police escort to my car, I can probably handle when some other media guy's a jerk to me and screws up my day.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't think I answered your question there, but the bottom line is that's what I miss. I miss Friday Night Football.
Okay. All right.
Not much else. So I don't need to do my own podcast. I honestly, I enjoy being on other people's podcasts.
Yeah.
It's easier. And yeah, I like it. I never met a microphone I didn't like, if you probably understand.
Well, like I said, the reason why I think you could do it is because of everything. I mean, you've got so many stories to share, and this, and then even in reference to Title IX, I mean, of course, everybody would have their own opinion on it, but I mean, you were, in a way, you were really in the early stages of ESPN. You were covering all these sports. You gave an opinion like Charles Barkley, and really showed that women can do almost anything. I mean, you're looking like now, 2025. You got Susie Colbert. You got Hannah Storm. You got oh God, who else?
So you're telling me you think it's women sportscasters are better, are getting appreciated today?
They should be.
They're not. They're not, and I'll tell you why.
Okay. Most
of the jobs that women have in sports broadcasting are the dumbest sportscasting job there is, and that's being a sideline reporter. They are useless jobs. And honestly, they should just have friggin' nurses on the sidelines, medical professionals.
Wow.
Because what do they say? Gosh, Bob, I think he tore his ACL. They don't talk about football.
No.
Okay. And and honestly, yeah, you see a lot more women today than in my time, but that's because there's so many more outlets. We've got the internet, we've got YouTube, we've got teams with their own people. So there are a lot more jobs, but women have not moved up really. Why can't a woman do play-by-play in color on an NFL game?
I'm going to stop you right there.
I know there are 2 times it's happened. And guess what? It was a Thursday night game with Hannah Storm and I can't think of the other woman's name at the moment, Andre Kramer. Okay. And the league made what a big damn deal it was going to be. But guess what? You had to go to some other station. If you turned into the regular night, you got Troy Aikman and Joe Buck. And if you wanted to see the women, you had to go to some random station. They weren't even at the game. They were in a studio somewhere else. And almost nobody listened. So that was years ago. Okay. Why is it happening?
Well, what I was going to say is here in Philadelphia, for the 76ers, they actually at NBC Sports Philadelphia have a female play-by-play anchor.
Why do you think that is?
Because the times are changing.
No, not really. It's because women play basketball. Women have always played basketball. So basketball, the NBA has, I think, 8 women officials. 8.
Yeah. I've seen the women officials. Yeah.
Women play basketball, so they are much more accepted in games they play. Are there any in Major League Baseball? No. I mean, are there? Oh, you know what? Sometimes I mix up my sports officiating and my sports broadcasting. So I'm going to retract that. I was talking about sports officials in the NBA. It's the same deal though. Yeah. So just like in broadcasting, if a woman played basketball, she can be a broadcaster for basketball. If she played basketball, she can be an official, but not in baseball, not in the NFL. They stick the women on the sidelines and they have nothing to do. Sometimes they only go to
I actually going to concur on that one. Supposedly, supposedly she is. There is a female coach
Yes, the NFL has a couple assistant coaches, not
Yeah.
a coach.
Okay,
And
but I mean, they do. Yeah, they do like the like endurance or something like that.
yeah, but here's the thing:
Yeah.
the NFL Pro Bowl makes a big deal about how they're backing women in sports, and it's like I can't think of her name. Jen somebody. She was a coach with the Arizona Cardinals, and they made
Right.
such a big deal out of it. Isn't this great? And they actually took her shirt, and it's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But the bottom line is, she was an intern over the summer and never got hired for a job.
Wow.
Shannon Easton, first woman to call an NFL game. They have her hat and her whistle in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But she was an official when the regular officials had walked out. They never gave her a job.
Wow.
So please, and the thing with the women doing the play-by-play in the color. Well, they're not giving. The bottom line is the NFL isn't stupid. They know that the vast majority of their products are bought by women. Women buy their husbands the jerseys, they buy their kids. Yes. So they are so pushing this idea. All the ads about, flag football for women. It's a marketing ploy. They don't care. I will say this, unlike in my time when you'd watch like the Dallas Cowboys, every other shot would be a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader wearing not much. They don't do that anymore, do they? They don't do that because they go, it might be offensive. If they're going to show me some hot guy shaking his ass, that'd be nice. You're going to be equal about it.
Yeah.
But they have gotten away from that for the most part.
Of course, you had to mention a team that, I know people that are big fans of. And I actually kind of pick on one of them because I actually we went to school together, and he kind of did like not maybe not PR, but like he did promotions where Tony Dorsett or Michael Irvin or Roger Staubach would come up and sign, do autographs and stuff. So he kind of was like doing that. And then you have one who is a fan of the sport, but of course, it all comes back to who hates Jerry Jones the most in reference to how Dallas is run. Now, here in Philadelphia, yes, they're all on high because we just won the Super Bowl, and it took 7 years between that one and the first one they won. Before that was 1980, but of course I wasn't in Philadelphia in 1980. I was in Jersey. But here in Philadelphia, you almost have to be careful what you wear in the city, because if it's not Eagles, Phillies, Flyers, Sixers, you're on thin ice. And one thing I can say in reference to the Philly fan, I mean, don't get me wrong. I will root for Philadelphia as long as they're not playing a team that I am a fan of. Okay. So if they're playing, of course, if they're playing the Yankees, I want the Phillies to beat the crap out of them, because the Yankees are like this. That's right. Yankees are snobs. All bullheaded. But that's my own personal opinion, because they think their shit don't stink. Just because they have 27 titles. Big fucking deal. Yeah, the Mets have 3. But guess what? We're not all high and mighty. But again, that is my opinion. And that's anybody that ever talks to me about Yankees and Mets. Oh, just because the Yankees won 27 titles. Big fucking deal. Yeah, you got Aaron Judge right now, who can belt 60 home runs. Yeah, test him for steroids. Okay, that's my personal opinion. I think he's hooked up. But that is my personal opinion. And yes, all you Yankee fans can curse me out. I don't give a shit. Okay? Stop being snobbish about the 27 titles. Be like regular fans. But Philly fans, yeah. If you bash them, oh God. It's like you have to really watch out. And especially when the Eagles won the Super Bowl and you looked at the street, South Broad Street, oh yeah, they were all out crazy on climbing up the poles. They had to grease the poles to make sure nobody climbed them. And of course, somebody's going to climb them. Somebody's going to be idiotic and climb and get hurt, But this is Philadelphia. Anything can happen. So, but you don't see yourself wanting to host a podcast or really rehashing some of these past. I mean, you're educator. You teach sports reporting at Arizona State University.
Okay, I did that very briefly.
Yeah.
Okay. Until I did it until they rate the instructor at the end of the semester, and one of the kids wrote, "The next time Arizona State wants to hire someone to teach sports reporting, it should be someone younger."
Oh,
I was like, really?
Wow.
Okay. And I wanted to say, Chris Berman, he and I worked together. We had the same agent, and he's 2 years younger than I am. So do you think if Chris Berman walked in there to teach sports reporting, they would have questioned that?
Oh, of course not. Of course not. No, because
maybe because I was a woman teacher, they felt they were getting cheated because
Yep. Yeah, and like I say, it's a shame. Like I said, it took so many years here in Philadelphia, even for now to have a woman actually doing the play-by-play for the Sixers.
Yes, it's a game women play. It was said before, because the understanding is this woman played basketball her whole life. Yay, she can talk about it. Yeah. But honestly, today, if I were young, I would play hockey. I wouldn't be an ice dancer. I would have been a hockey player. And then they would have said, well, they're better in the NHL about having women around.
Right.
But it's still the same problem. Unless you're an Olympic gold medalist in ice dancing or ice skating, and you can talk about that forever. I mean, they'll hire you when the Olympics come around every year. Yeah. But for a woman to cover regular sports on a regular basis or do play-by-play or color for professional teams, there's hardly any. And if you would have told me 40 years ago we'd still be doing this, I would go, really? We haven't advanced that much? Yeah.
I mean, now that you got the WNBA, because they finally woke up and said, you know what, let's set up a girls basketball league. Like you said about the NFL, that's all a marketing ploy for flag football for girls and stuff. What do you, in reference to the WNBA, what is your opinion about it? You think the NBA made a good move in setting up this women's league?
They did PR-wise, but let's face it, the WNBA would have died years ago without the NBA funneling money into it.
Right.
But now, through something the NBA had nothing to do with, suddenly there's this massive interest in NCAA women's basketball. Right. In fact, the last 2 years, I think that the women's finals drew more fans than the men's finals. So there's more and more interest in women's basketball, and the women are now getting paid better and they're traveling better. They're not slamming them in coach on a public regular plane. It is getting better, and people accept that women will be involved as broadcasters, as coaches, as officials, because women play that game. Right. But it's all the other games I'm wondering about.
Yeah.
Why can't I talk about baseball? I umpired baseball for 25 years. I know the game.
Yeah.
But they're not those jobs out there. One or two people go, oh, well, there's this one woman, like one place, like you did with the woman in Philly. But why aren't there hundreds?
Yeah. And like I said, as I was growing up, of course, we had, we had, of course, you had Marv Albert, and like I said, like in reference to ESPN, Chris Berman, and Rich Eisen, and Dan Patrick, and all that, and where are they at now? Well, Chris Berman, somewhat still with ESPN, but like Dan Patrick now hosts a radio show, and
because I'll tell you why, it's exhausting. It's an exhausting life. And when people go, oh, I'd sit next to people in a bar or something, and they'd say, oh, I could do your job. I'm like, no, you can't. You have no idea. The pressure. I'm going to die a little early from the stress of having to get on a set in 30 seconds and slide on when the red light goes on. It's an exhausting job that never ends, especially when you're doing 2 shows a day. You got to write a show, do a show, get on there, everything's in, then you got to do it again over and over. I was on live TV 2,000 times. Literally. And I'm going to die a little young because of it. And so when people, especially guys sitting in bars, drinking lots of beer, tell me, oh man, I could do your job. No, you couldn't.
No.
I'm sorry.
I mean, like I said, even in reference with me, I mean, I still think, even at 54, and yes, I just said I'm 54. Okay, I should say be proud of it, but that's a whole different story. But I still feel that I could go on the radio, and I actually was on the radio, folks, way back in 1980. No, 83. 84, but that's because, and yes, she was a radio host. She did, the public relations type shows, and we actually did a quote unquote advice club in school, and there was only 2 of us, but we actually was on WCTC AM 1450 in New Brunswick. And we did a show for an hour. We taped it. But of course, we didn't get the live calls and stuff like you would.
Live TV is a whole different animal.
Yeah, but I'm saying I would have loved it. I would have loved it. And I still do. And I actually do reach out to, like I said, on Facebook. I do know some radio personalities, and I've even attempted. I just attempted recently. And this is the first I'm saying this now, so a lot is coming out. So I thank you for this, Anne, and I do apologize if I've kept her over the hour at the same time, but I do want to say that I had made an attempt, and I'm putting in quotes, attempt, to put this podcast in radio form on Sirius XM. Of course, I haven't heard back. Am I expecting to hear back? Probably not. But it was a thrill to attempt to try to get on Sirius XM, even though I have no actual physical experience of working the boards. But that was another reason why I set up this GoFundMe campaign to expand the podcast, is to go on radio, like a New Jersey 101.5 FM, or, a Sirius XM.
But there's a lot of work involved in those. There's research, there's producing the show, planning what's going to happen every show, every day. So it's really an exhausting business. And when you say, why don't I want to do a podcast? That's why. I ran crazy most of my life. I am now retired from everything but writing books. And I'm happy.
And I feel bad because I haven't talked about the books. I've been talking more about sports and everything.
No, that's fine. Don't worry about it.
And I mean, so we'll make this quick like I said, because I'm feeling bad because I kept you over the hour, but it's been interesting. So that's why, like I said, sometimes I attempt to try to make these 30 minutes, but I've had them gone 2 hours, 3 hours, because the conversation got comfortable.
Except it's almost cocktail time here in the Caribbean.
oh! You know what? I just got a free cruise because I go to the casinos, and one of my goals, Caribbean. So we're working on it. But just explain a little bit briefly about the books that you wrote.
Okay. As I said before, I do not write sports books at all. After I got out of television and got over feeling sorry for myself, I ended up being a teacher in a Title I school. And what that means is most of the kids live in poverty.
Right.
So there were gangs and drugs and weapons and horrible stuff all the time. So I write books about societal issues. I wrote a book about a young girl who was in a religious cult. I wrote about post-traumatic stress, a friend of mine who was in Vietnam. I wrote about domestic violence. I wrote about the wild horse problem in Arizona. We have wild horses and people are killing them, and it's crazy. And I've written 2 historical fiction books. The one that came out last year, Your Forgotten Sons, is about a man who I wrote it from letters that were 75 years old that he sent home from World War II, and he never came home. But he was in the Graves Registration Service. Meant his job was to locate, identify, and bury the dead. And this man was at Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge. He was with Patton in Czechoslovakia. And when you go to Normandy or any one of the 26 countries that have our American cemeteries, these are the guys that built those cemeteries, those beautiful cemeteries, and they collected body parts. That's what they did. So I wrote a book about him. So I do not stick with one genre. I write about things that interest me.
Okay. Now that we said one genre,
yeah,
you got me thinking a minute. Give me a second, because I'm going to ask you opinion.
Okay.
And just bear with me one moment, folks. And like I said, I appreciate Anne staying past the hour. Like I said, this conversation is getting to be very interesting, and I'm enjoying it. And so I have to introduce you to, how I said somebody in reference to the Dallas Cowboys, and how they're not big fans of Jerry Jones and how he's running the team. So just bear with me one moment. So being that you had just mentioned that you when you write your books that you don't stay in one genre, have you thought of possibly doing something like this? It takes a moment.
I don't know what you mean at all.
I'm going to explain in a minute. I'm going to explain. Uh-oh. There we go. This is American Fox. She is a real-life superheroine. She is also this podcast's #1 fan and supporter. Have you thought about maybe writing a novel in reference to superheroines?
Never once. But I do write about strong women.
Okay.
Not quite like that. No.
Not quite like this. Okay.
No.
Okay. So that's why I was like thinking that. That's why I brought this up real quick in reference to
No, not my genre. No.
But okay. But well, in a way, you did say, you write about strong women.
Yes, yes, I do. But real women, not ones that aren't maybe all real. I don't know.
Yeah, well, she is real. Believe it or not, she is real.
I know, but you know what I mean. I think you're teasing me now.
Yeah. but she is a real life superheroine, and she is very strong, but more than
Not
just
saying
strength
it's
alone.
not.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that no, I have never written about that kind of superheroine. No.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So, what's next for Anne?
I have a book called Wolfcatcher, which is coming out again, and that happens sometimes in the publishing world. One publisher closes, and you have orphan books that have nowhere to go. So
Right.
my orphan book, a work of historical fiction, it's written about a man who was buried 900 years ago out of Flagstaff, Arizona, and he had 600 magnificent funerary objects. And he looked very strange. He did not look like the Native Americans who would have lived there 1,000 years ago. And so I was hired by a magazine to try to find out who he was. And I got in all kinds of trouble. So it's the modern day part of the book is actually my own experiences being a reporter trying to get a story done. Right. And what was happening 1,000 years ago around Flagstaff. So a volcano erupted. There's all kinds of crazy things. But the bottom line is it's called Wolfcatcher, and it's going to be reissued. So I just finished the re-editing of it this week, and there'll be a new cover. It's being rebranded. So that's my current project to get that book out on the market.
Okay. All right. So I have the website here, AnneMontgomeryWriter.com. So you can reach out to Anne that way and possibly, purchase her books, and read her blogs and so on. This podcast just started a newsletter, and I also post these podcasts as well as upcoming events, and hopefully even if we get enough support for the meet and greet, be great to have Anne here and come down to Lake Atlantic City and even meet with American Fox and do
you know where I am right now?
Yeah, I know. You said the Caribbean.
I'm at the furthest eastern point of the United States.
Yeah.
I'm off like Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico.
Oh, she's a 4-hour flight. Okay, she's a 4-hour flight.
I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I'm on a little tiny island. It's called St. Croix.
Okay. No, I've heard St. Croix. I'm just saying. But
it's one of the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah.
Like St. Thomas, St. John, but it's the one no one ever goes to. It's nice and quiet and peaceful.
Oh, well, that might change soon. But I say, if we get enough support, maybe we can get Anne to come up to Atlantic City and sign books and, for her followers that might be up here in the East Coast, to come say hi to her and meet her in person. And
I have to mention here, I don't know if I did, I am from New Jersey.
Okay. Now, do you believe there's a Central Jersey? Yes or no?
No. There's North and South Jersey.
All right. That's it.
When I was growing up, nobody mentioned Central Jersey. It was North and South.
Okay.
Or New York City. That was it.
Well, I grew up in Central Jersey, I am proud to say, and it actually took Governor Murphy to open up his mouth and say, yes, there is a Central Jersey. Okay. After all these years, everybody, like everybody says, North and South. Oh, yeah, you're in North Jersey. No, I'm in Central Jersey. Okay,
I'm from North
Central Jersey, even though they consider it North. But of course, but that's what's happened in the past couple of years. They've actually established that there is a Central Jersey. So there is now a North Central. Yeah. So there's now a North, Central, and South. And the Central actually starts in, I believe they said, Elizabeth, and goes down to Trenton and off to the right to like.
I haven't lived there since I was 18. So
okay.
A long time.
Well, I'm just saying that's what they did. Like, they made like Seaside Heights would be considered Central Jersey almost, as compared to Atlantic City being South. So, but again, that's what has happened over the past years. But Anne, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was a very interesting conversation. It was great to bring up sports and chat about sports and where women stand and where they should be standing in reference to broadcasting and sports officials, etc. So everybody go to AnneMontgomeryWriter.com and pick up the books. Reach out to her because she'd love to hear. And if she comes to me and says, someone put me down, someone got at me because of what you said about Jersey, be prepared to get cursed out. Be prepared to get cursed out on in the next podcast.
I was a referee. I was an umpire. You think you can hurt my feelings? You can't.
Well, you know what I'm saying. I'm saying it to be sarcastic at the same time.
I know.
Yeah, but I thank you, Anne, for coming on here. It was very enjoyable. And you're welcome to come back on.
Inviting me, Joey. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and anytime you want to come back on, just let me know, and we will open it up, and we will go more into the writing than the sports, unless we have to go back and rehash the sports again. But Anne, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for watching the Life with Joey Calvin podcast. God bless you all.
Thank you.